Hello, Podsmashers of the Internet, and welcome to another episode of
80-bit Podsmash,
where gaming goes to grab a beer. We are your hosts.
Penguin and Termite. I'm Penguin.
I am Termite, and we are a weekly video game podcast smashing together ideas that you care about with video games.
That's right, and tonight the idea that we are talking about is we are talking about game engines. So, not the combustion engines that you have in cars, but the software that is actually used. Yeah. That's why they're called engines, actually, probably. Anyways, the software that you use to actually build games, or software suite, as the case may be, as we will talk about. So yeah, that's what our conversation is about. There's a lot that goes into this. It's funny because we have used the word game engine. It comes up regularly in our podcast as we discuss news about games, as we discuss games themselves. But we have never actually gone into what is a game engine. So we're going to spend some time talking about that. So hopefully it'll be educational.
A genre, like the video game genres that we use to describe games, sometimes the name of the engine can be used to describe a game. And you're like,
that's true, yeah.
That's how this game looks and feels. Because it has the same engine. And so,
exactly.
We're going to educate and fill your mind with all of the technical know-hows and not so technical know-hows of video game engines. I'm excited. This is kind of a nerdy Termite topic.
It is, but it is ironically one that I came up with. So, but I came up with it with you in mind. So I was like, man, he's going to want to talk about this, and he's going to want to get into all the nitty-gritty about it. So it'll be fun. It should be a good episode, hopefully. Anyways, we are where gaming goes to grab a beer. So what are we drinking tonight as we continue our social distancing isolation and have separate beers? What are you drinking tonight?
As I continue to sell out to my favorite brewery, Dogfish Head, I have a beer from them called The Perfect Disguise. It's a double IPA, and there's no description on the bottle, but I found one on their website. So I'm going to read what would normally be on the bottle or can to you guys. On the surface, The Perfect Disguise looks like a straightforward Kolsch with a crisp Kolsch yeast and traditional German malts and hops. But things aren't always what they seem. With a quick sniff and a slight sip, you're greeted by a creamy mouthfeel and full body thanks to the addition of a unique German chit malt, the first hint that this beer may be somewhat different. Hiding deeper behind that German disguise is the double dry hopping of an American double IPA. With nearly 4 pounds of German and American hops per barrel, it brings tropical flavors of citrus, tangerine, mango, gooseberries, and peach. So it is an absolutely incredible beer. Super well balanced, kind of light bodied, and all the descriptions about the citrus notes are all there. So, yep, good stuff. I love this beer. It's 8% too.
Nice. I am drinking a concoction of my own creation. It's not a beer, but it is alcohol-filled. So we had some leftover Jose Cuervo from when we made margaritas on Cinco de Mayo. So I wanted to use some of that. We also have these seltzers that we have fallen in love with, and they're from Food Lion. They're Food Lion brand seltzers, and they are cranberry lime, and they are just above and beyond any other seltzer I've ever had. Maybe not ever, but like, they're better than LaCroix. Anything I've had from LaCroix, they are just really good seltzers. They're that perfect balance of like flavorful enough, but again, they're seltzers. You don't want it to be overwhelmingly flavorful. But like, there are times when I take a drink of it and I'm like, there's no way there's no sugar in this, but there's no sugar. So
LaCroix is overrated.
Yeah, LaCroix is overrated for sure.
Yeah.
There are definitely better seltzer brands out there, even among seltzer brands. Anyways, so for the Food Lion cranberry lime seltzers, I mixed it with some Jose Cuervo and just a squeeze. I had some fresh limes left over too, so I squeezed some lime juice in there, about half a lime in there. So it is a poor man's margarita, and it is pretty good. It doesn't have the overwhelming sweetness of a margarita, like sugar, like, you know, when you put agave syrup in there or whatever you mix, or even just margarita mix. And my wife and I were making them with limeade, which is great because that's even less, like, that's less sugar than a normal margarita mix. But even that, it's limeade, so it's still full of sugar. So this is not so sugary. It's just, again, you still got that cranberry lime crisp taste out of it. And then the Jose Cuervo itself is just so good. I love silver tequila.
Awesome. You're talking to somebody who likes to make bougie cocktails made from scratch ingredients. And I have made a margarita that my folks have told me I need to add sugar to it because it's not sweet enough. And it consists of nothing but lime juice, Cointreau, and tequila. And it's amazing. That
sounds great. I don't get me wrong. I have a sweet tooth. I love sugar. Yeah. But I also like a drink that doesn't have a ton of sugar in it. So this is pretty good. Again, for just being like with ingredients I had on hand and just taking a break from beer for one recording session, I was like, I need to do this while we have the cranberry lime on hand, because those go fast in our house. As soon as we have them, it's like, both Mason and I are like, oh, cranberry lime seltzer, it's so good. So, yeah, that's what I'm drinking. Anyways, that's what we're drinking tonight. We usually start the show by talking about beer, but also talking about what's going on in the gaming industry, some news, some goings-ons.
Yeah.
So what's goings-ons?
We talked about the Summer Games Fest. That Jeff Keighley is kind of organizing a ton of different platformers, software developer teams, studios, publishers that are all going to have events spaced out throughout the whole summer over the next 4 months. And the very first event to kick that off was an Inside Xbox presentation. So it was exclusively from Microsoft, showing off what they touted as, quote, gameplay. I'm not actually reading anything. This is what they said. They literally said gameplay from the Xbox Series X will be featured in this presentation. So it was hyped up. It was going to be the first time we've seen anything from next gen other than the little tidbit we got of Senua's Sacrifice 2, Godfall, and what's that? There's another game.
Halo Infinite.
No, they didn't actually show gameplay of that. That was only a cinematic trailer. There's a game that's coming out for all platforms. It's like Harbinger, no. Darksiders, no. I don't remember the name of this game.
It doesn't matter. Carry on.
Anyway, no one's really seen next gen yet, so it's a big deal, right? Anyway, this thing happens. Overall, I'll just go through some of the highlights. I'm not going to list everything they announced because there's a lot of stuff, but I'll just say they promised Assassin's Creed Valhalla in-game action. They promised updates on various other studios. So we expected immediately all of these new Microsoft exclusive studios that they have been purchasing and buying that we're aware of, and we've also talked about on this podcast. Their very first statement was that we will not show anything from our first-party development studios. So we're like, oh, well, there goes that. However, here are some of the highlights that they did show from the game. I'm not going to go into everything because it'll take too long, but they showed off Bandai Namco has a new game called Scarlet Nexus. It actually looks pretty promising. It's very, very, very Japanese anime RPG. Action-oriented RPG. They're taking a book. It looks like it's taking a note from Platinum Games' Playbook. It's like the third-party action hack and slash kind of Ni no Kuni 2, Final Fantasy 7 remake, but it's all cel-shaded and very anime. There was a giant presentation about Madden NFL 21. There was The Medium, is a new horror game from the makers of what's the game with the paintings and the changing environments that we played at my house? I'm losing my mind. Layers of Fear. They're the studio that brought you Layers of Fear 1 and 2. It's their next game called The Medium, which is pretty cool. And then it showed Dirt 5 is a new racing game entry that's pretty popular amongst fans. A new Yakuza game called Like a Dragon. And this is a big deal because Yakuza has been a PlayStation exclusive forever. So the first time that this game is being shown is on an Xbox platform at an Xbox presentation. So that's a big deal.
It's not exclusive though, right? Sega. It's coming out for...
Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
It'll be for everything, yep. And then Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines 2 was probably their biggest highlight of this whole presentation, announcing that game and showing it off. And Deep Silver is a publisher that published the Metro games. They're most known for that. There's a new game from them called Chorus that looks pretty interesting. It was kind of like that.
It looked like a more grown-up Star Fox, like a spaceship fighter pilot sim shooter, but like very sci-fi, and like its vibe was very Control, like with the red and black and some sort of supernatural dark aspect to it, but very also like science-y space shooter as well. Sorry, go on. That was the only one that I really watched.
Yeah. Chorus looks promising. It looks pretty cool. And then they ended the show with a Assassin's Creed Valhalla in-engine cinematic. So no actual gameplay, despite what they promised. Yeah. So overall, that's what they had. And there's some other smaller stuff in there too that I'm not going to go into all that. But overall, very lackluster. I think it was hyped up too much. They
didn't show off enough actual gameplay for any of the titles. Like even Chorus, the one that I watched, it was mostly cinematics and then like some brief flashes of gameplay. But like it makes sense, right? Because most of these games are still a year or two off from like being released, so they probably don't have things like UI and stuff like that ready to go. So they would just look janky in those regards. So they can only show off the like briefly polished, segments they do have. But they shouldn't have brought me again. I think Microsoft even came out and made a statement later that we overpromised. Like we should have been very careful with how we worded what we were presenting.
Good on Microsoft for that. I actually missed that. I didn't see that.
Yeah, I know. It was a statement they made earlier. I don't know exactly who made it, but they were like, it came from some official Microsoft channel that they were like, we understand that we set expectations, like we set the wrong expectations. Because if they had not said that it was like going to be a big gameplay showcase, then it probably would have been much more well received, because people would have been like, oh, cool, like here's just another Inside Xbox video with some cool games they showed off, some new announcements. So without that, if they had just released it and said nothing leading up to it, the expectations wouldn't have been so high. But because they're like, we're showing off next gen gameplay for the first time, like, and then didn't deliver on that, or at least not. I mean, they delivered the bare minimum on that. And with the Assassin's Creed thing, they was outright misleading. There was no actual gameplay of the Assassin's Creed Valhalla, which, have we talked about that was announced? I don't know if we talked about that yet.
I thought we mentioned it.
Did we mention it?
We can go over it again if you want. If you're not sure, we can say
new Assassin's Creed. I mean, the very short of it is that a new to the surprise of no one, there's a new Assassin's Creed game, and it's taking place like in a Viking setting. So following in God of War's footsteps. First they did Greece, and now they're doing Vikings.
Yeah.
But it's called Valhalla. So Assassin's Creed Valhalla. And it's going to follow kind of the same ideas that the franchise has been adapting with Odyssey and Origins. The more RPG elements. Something about like you can be the leader of your Viking settlement. So there's going to be some like growing of your settlement aspect to it as well. But more departure from their stealth action game roots, one could argue,
into the like RPG open world exploration. So it's interesting. That game's going to be cool to pay attention to, because the new consoles are going to have, this is a cross-gen game, no doubt. It's going to come out on everything. So the whole like free upgrades to the PS5 and the Xbox Series X versions, what that looks like. I mean, Microsoft calls theirs smart delivery. Who knows what PlayStation 5 will call theirs? But the fact that this like comes out across both console generations, what the developers are touting as the most notable feature of next gen is the loading times. And so, what will the difference be for like fast travel or load times? Because that's the tip of the iceberg.
That will be the practical. Like, you'll be able to practically, like, especially if you have both systems, which you do. You have an Xbox One, I guess. So you'd probably get some. Well, I don't know, because you may not get an Xbox Series X. If you were to get an Xbox Series X, anybody who does have both consoles and intends to keep both consoles, with smart delivery, theoretically, you could pop the game in one, pop the game in the other, and then compare side by side. So it would be interesting to see like a direct practical comparison. I imagine it'll be much, 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 much faster on the new console. But I did read somewhere that some publisher, I don't know if it was one of the bad guy publishers. I don't know if it was EA or Activision, but some publisher announced they would not be supporting smart delivery. So apparently there is some publisher signing off. There has to be some signing off by the publishers for Xbox smart delivery system, which sucks, because that means that greedy publishers now can veto that aspect of the console. And so I think, was it EA? Do you remember?
I don't remember off the top of my head.
Okay, yeah, but it does mean that like if you buy not every game that you put into both consoles, like you'll get the upgraded version of. So that's kind of crappy. But oh well. I wish Microsoft took a stronger stance on that, but I suppose at the end of the day, they're not going to turn down a third-party game. Yeah, exactly. So yeah, Assassin's Creed Valhalla. I thought their codename Ragnarok was fun and cool, and I liked it a lot because it made me think of Thor, but I think I like Valhalla better. Valhalla is less, I mean, they more or less, I guess they don't refer to the same exact thing. Valhalla is more like the Norse equivalent of heaven, whereas Ragnarok is more like the Norse equivalent of Armageddon. Nevertheless, Valhalla is much less often used. Ragnarok is way overused in in pop culture. We love the idea of Ragnarok. Do you want to know where I first encountered Ragnarok? The word
Final
Ragnarok?
Fantasy 7?
Final Fantasy, was it 7? No, it was 8. The ship was called Ragnarok.
There was a summon called Ragnarok, I thought, in
there?
Final Fantasy 7.
Then probably I encountered it first in 7. I remember it in 8 more because of the ship. So anyways, that's all we have really for news. So just that
Final Fantasy 6 Ragnarok. I'm dumb. Even more old school. What's Super Nintendo?
I did not play 6 then. Yep.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, that's all we have for news, is mostly just that Inside Xbox event. Again, news continues to be going through a slow season as more and more companies prepare for their summer announcements in lieu of no proper E3. So
everyone's relegated to their homes, and all of their home systems and their like architecture at home, and like they're not in their office, they're not having meetings regularly the same way. So it's going to be weird, and
it's weird.
That's kind of why like the explanation as to why would Microsoft have this press conference that's so mediocre and overpromise and underdeliver. And it's like, well, everybody's working from home. Like, what are they going to do? They still have timelines to meet. They still have, shareholders to please, and, marketing to do, and games to sell, and a new system to market. And
everything
everyone's at home.
And everything's big question marks too. Like, so many games are having to have the conversations. Are we going to delay, or are we not going to delay?
Right.
Game design, no matter, there is a lot of technology to allow a lot of jobs to be done from home, and game design can be done from home, but it's not that easy. I mean, Sakurai himself, I think, posted an article about having to delay explaining the delay for the new whatever next DLC character after the ARMS one, or maybe it's the ARMS one. I don't know. Whatever DLC character they're designing. And he explains that like, it's a matter, like the biggest thing that people don't think about is like, it's a matter of file size. Like the file, as we'll talk about here in the game engine, we're gonna be talking about game engine, so this is kind of relevant. Like when you create these assets, they're massively huge files, and you can't just like if you're in your office, you're probably connected to a server of some kind. You're probably like, VP, like not even VPN. You're on a network. And so you're just dropping things into whatever file share that the company, and that stuff, those connections are more or less instantaneous. But when you're trying to send things over the internet, you have to rely on like bandwidth, and you have to rely on things like Dropbox, file sharing applications, all of which it just takes longer. So I imagine it slows down the process significantly. And I imagine that's true for cinematics and trailers and people doing that kind of editing as well. They have to pull files down through their internet and then upload files back up through the internet. So I imagine it just slows down the process.
And immensely. Production files are way bigger than what you get on the disc. So when you put that disc in and you're like, oh my gosh, 100 gigabytes? Well, this is insane. That's like the final rendered, compressed version of what they're making. What they're making is terabytes.
Yeah.
Terabytes
for sure.
of data.
Yeah, it's crazy. So anyways, everyone just kind of be patient. Everything has slowed down. I would rather get the games. I would rather them not rush deadlines when they have to, deal with all the same hurdles that we're all dealing with in our workplaces. So cool.
Yeah.
All right. Well, that leads us on to our next segment. So having to balance game design with working from home is not our favorite thing, but
doing this podcast is our favorite thing. Doing this podcast is our favorite thing.
Favorite Things is a segment of our show where we want to just update you with the thing that we have discovered or rediscovered this week that makes us happy, brings us joy, and that we hope that you might be inspired to find your next favorite thing as a result.
Yeah.
So I can talk about mine.
Thing?
Yeah. All right.
Get it.
So Macy and I don't really watch many movies anymore. We just tend to, we usually get invested in a TV series, and that's, when we have time to watch something together and decompress and relax with one another, we're like, let's watch the next episode of whatever show that we watch. So we don't really spend a lot of time catching up on movies, which sucks because there are some great movies out there. And there's a lot of movies that I missed last year because I had a kid, and my ability to go see movies, with a newborn had tanked significantly, and I still probably he's like one now, but I still probably can't go out and see movies, at least not without some coordination. Anyway, so there's a lot of movies I missed. One of the movies I missed last year that I regretted not seeing in theaters, but still wanted to catch up on and just hadn't gotten around to, was a movie called Knives Out. So we finally picked it up on Redbox, and it was so good. Like, it's been a while since I have thought that like a murder mystery, like Agatha Christie style, big house with secret passages, eccentric detective, big reveal at the end where the detective goes through all the evidence, or all the like, and then this person was here and this person was there and you did this, didn't you? You know what I mean? Like that whole like format that Agatha Christie made famous.
Yeah.
Like I thought that was like, okay, that's been played out. There's no way that anyone in 2020 could make a movie or make a movie like that anymore. But Rian Johnson, the director of The Last Jedi, that's what he's kind of most famous for. He made this movie, and it was so freaking good. Like, definitely everything you want out of that kind of murder, that kind of like, estate murder mystery where it all takes place in just kind of one single location. And
like Clue?
Yeah, it was very Cluey. Like,
nice.
but Clue is a comedy. This is an actual like murder mystery. Like, this is straight out. It's got its comedic moments, but it's meant to be consumed seriously, at face value, and it was very good. But like, Chris Evans is in it, Daniel Craig is in it, Jamie Lee Curtis is in it, and Daniel Craig, by the way, is like he plays the detective, and he is awesome. Like, for as much as I can imagine playing James Bond, you've got like 15 acting coaches who are all telling you that you have to play James Bond a very specific way to please the studio. Apparently, Rian Johnson was just like, go nuts. Play this character how you want to play this character. And he said he had a blast, and you can tell just how much fun Daniel Craig is having playing Benoit Blanc, who's the detective. He's got this very Georgian southern accent, and it's just it's so good. I love it.
I mean, it reviewed really well, and it made a lot of money. I remember it made waves when it came out.
Yeah, so definitely, if you're a movie fan, if you love murder mysteries, go check out Knives Out. It was so good.
Sounds awesome. I'm all in. I'm texting my wife about it now. We need to rent it.
Perfect.
You can rent it on Amazon Prime for $6 or Redbox for $3.
Redbox for $1. We got ours for free because Macy had a code.
Yeah, there's codes all over the internet.
Oh, yeah.
It's perfect. My favorite thing has been, and this is a double whammy wrapped up into one story, Mortal Kombat 11. Amazing. Amazing game. It came out last year, 2019, actually, in like April. And I did not buy it because it's a fighting game that's not Smash Bros. And I usually don't spend $60 on fighting games because they're shallow. This is not an exception. So it's not worth $60. But I got it for $10. And I got it for $10 because I had a reward certificate from purchasing Final Fantasy VII Remake at my Best Buy account. So I had $10 to spend to knock down off the price. GameStop had the game on sale for $20. So I price matched from GameStop to Best Buy and then discounted it by $10 with my certificate and then only paid $10 out of pocket. Nice. Went and picked it up, curbside delivery. It is a ridiculously polished, quality, amazing fighting game. There is no doubt. No wonder that game won so many awards and did so well. It is absolutely worth it. It is the best Mortal Kombat since 4, I think, for me. The last one was Mortal Kombat 9, which came out on 360 and PS3. And prior to that, 5, 6, and 7 were okay. It's just it's awesome. It's so the design mechanics, the animations are fluid, the color, the art style, like everything feels so good. It's also ridiculously technical, and so much that the tutorial will walk you through the frame data of animations and recovery actions. So if you fall over, it takes X amount of frames for you to get up. Well, you can interrupt that and attack your opponent during this time. Here's how to do it. And it shows you that. And like this projectile move costs you 12 frames. You're left exposed for 6 of those. So, time this right and be on guard for this and how to counter throws and how to block. And I get lost in that. I'm not good at fighting games. I'm terrible at them. That was super overwhelming, but it's there if you want it. Like, it's that deep. But you can also jump in and button mash and have a good time with your friends. I did that on a live stream. Last Wednesday was my turn to stream, so I streamed Mortal Kombat 11. T-Bone jumped in from the chat and fought me, and we had a great time at the end of that stream. It was awesome. So the game is my favorite thing. The discount's my favorite thing. And then the extra little sweet nugget on that is I have been using remote play on my computer that's hardwired into my router. My PlayStation 4 is also hardwired into my router, so the remote play is flawless. And I have a PS4 Pro, so I can set it to 1080p. So what remote play is I can hook a DualShock up to my computer and play my PlayStation from my computer as if it were plugged up directly into my monitor. It is like seamless. It's amazing. It's lag-free. It's sharp. It's awesome. So I've been doing some Mortal Kombat 11 allows you to set up some AI, and it allows you to send off your fighters to do things for you without actually controlling them. So all day today, through all of my meetings, all of my telecons, I had Mortal Kombat 11 running on remote play while earning trophies for doing fatalities without actually playing it through remote play. So that's my other favorite thing. Nice. Those are my favorite
Fantastic.
things.
Awesome.
Yep.
Cool. All right. That moves us to our next segment.
You were so quiet that I thought you had been disconnected, and I just kept talking, and I was hoping that I would get something from you to verify that it was okay, and I thought I feared we'd have to stop and restart, and you'd have to edit it, and you were very quiet. Did you mute yourself?
No, I just was listening to Mortal Kombat. Yeah, I don't have any feedback. I don't have the same love for Mortal Kombat that you do, so of course, I've never played it, but maybe when all this is over, we can play it, and you'll kick my butt, because I'm terrible at it.
I'm terrible at it. I'm horrible. I am absolute trash at Mortal Kombat.
Oh, I'm bad. I'll just button mash. Yeah,
you could probably beat me by doing that. I don't read opponents. I'm impatient. I don't... You know me. That's how I play Smash, too. I'm the same way. I'm terrible.
All right. Well, that moves us to our next segment, which is...
Ming, 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 ming.
DLC. We're going to do a Who Did This Architect Edition. Blah. A lot of syllables. So since we're talking about building games and the tools with which we build games, we're going to do a Who Built This? And so I'm going to have you think of any video game character.
Okay.
And then I'm going to come up with something that people build.
Nice.
So I'm going to go... So you have your character? Because you can't change it. So you can't change it, all right?
All right.
So, who built this? Who built this bridge? I'll go with the easy one first. Who built this bridge?
So it's Solid Snake. That was my character.
You do Snake a lot.
Do I really?
Yes. I feel like I don't know, 10% of the time that I have you pick a video game character, it's Snake.
Interesting.
That's fine. You can't change it though. It's too late.
I can't.
So, as with all Who Did This, I pick the thing, he picks the character, and we then break down what it looks like to have a bridge that would have been built by Solid Snake. So I'm thinking just very, very gray, utilitarian, well put together bridge designed by Solid Snake. Just
one of the most amazing achievements in architectural history, architectological. I don't know what word I'm looking for.
Architectural. That's you had it the first time.
Yeah, one of the biggest achievements in architectural engineering that has ever happened. It comes out of Solid Snake's brain, and
it's not sexy. It's not flashy.
Not pretty, right?
It's just as simple and well put together bridge as one can be. However, of course, since he's a spy, there's tons of little secret compartments and hidden passages built within the bridge. To traverse it without being seen. So.
And there's all these fail-safe redundancy things in case it gets collapsed or blown up. So it has fold-out recovery. So you blow up the middle section and things come out from underneath of it and fall in its place to kind of keep it up and running. So there's all these almost like an assassin's hidden blade when you think you've got him and there's nothing left. It's whooshing, there's a blade. Well, it's like that for a bridge. It's haha, I'm going to blow this up and we're going to take out all of its structural foundation. And he's got these have you seen Silicon Valley's latest season? And there's a guy that has a sit down chair legs. Oh my gosh. He has this pants that have metal things and he just sits. And the way that the metal rods are attached to the pants, the action of sitting down will force the legs
engages
to
them,
engages them, and then he can just sit anywhere he wants. So he's just walking around and then he sits and he's on a chair. and it's like that for a bridge. It's the moment the structural integrity is compromised, it just clicks in and it's spring loaded and it's ka-chink, 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 and it's this self-repairing thing. That's what Solid Snake comes up with.
Nice. All right, we will do one more, and this time we'll reverse it. I will think of the character, and you will think of the thing that people build, and we'll break it down. So I have my character locked in.
All right. The next generation space shuttle.
Designed and built by Luigi.
Perfect.
Oh, man. It's very, very Mushroom Kingdom in its style and look, but it also is just it's got these weird, quirky features. I imagine it just is it has places. Similarly, it has compartments where you can hide from booze, because obviously Luigi would be designing it knowing that eventually, inevitably, it would be haunted. If he spends any time in it, he knows there's going to be some booze somewhere. So it's got anti-boo. It's got vacuums, but it's, every air duct can also be reversed so it can suck the booze up if needed. And
he's probably worked with EGAD on the side, and EGAD has probably put all kind of stuff in it that Luigi has no idea exists to help defend and protect him. It also has nonsensical engineering that works. It works really well. It's
Right.
okay, this thing is going to the International Space Station. It's probably going to go to Mars, but it makes no sense why the fuel line is like wrapped around like a silly straw on the outside where it's exposed to danger. But it works.
It works.
Kind of stuff.
It definitely, and it works super well, but it definitely doesn't move or look like a space. It's kind of just like bumbling its way through space. Like when you watch it, it just moves like super erratically. Like it gets there, point A to point B, just fine. But also, you look at it and you're like, what the heck? What is it doing? Is it literally like sauntering through space right now? It's the image I get where it's just kind of like, that's very Luigi, I imagine.
Yes.
So, all right, great. Who built this? That was our game. I didn't even explain what DLC was, and that's fine. Anybody listening, 140 episodes. What?
Yeah, you did. Oh, I see what you mean. Like,
no,
what is
just like
DLC?
the basic introduction.
Our names are Dan and Dan, and so we come up with like a silly bit or extra little thing that we do on the side, like a downloadable content to a video game.
Mm-hmm.
There you go.
And it's
that's DLC.
downloadable content. Yep. Cool. Awesome.
And it costs.
So if you were just incredibly
confused
by that conversation, then apologies. I should have introduced it a little bit better. It's cool. All right. Well, that leads us to our main topic then, which is game engines. And yeah, let's start there by talking about what game engines are for those who are uninitiated. If this is your first podcast and you haven't heard us talk about them before, or if you have heard us talk about them before and been like, what do they refer to? Why do they keep using that terminology? What are game engines?
There is a wiki definition that's nice, but I also found this other resource, gamedesign.org/career/video game engines, which I thought was interesting because it sounds like a career page, but it's not. It's actually a very informative and concise website about video game engines. And they define it as a game engine is the architecture that developers use to run the game. Mm-hmm. Your average game engine provides developers with a way to add things like physics, input, so that's like controllers, rendering, scripting, so for like UI, you have to do some scripting for updating the GUI, collision detection, artificial intelligence, and more without the need to reprogram them from scratch.
Right, yeah.
And
so
that's a game engine.
That's it, yeah. We'll get into the history of how they came about, but the bottom line is that, to give you the very basic as to how they came about, because it's important to understand for the definition, is like you used to have to design games directly to run on the architecture, like of whatever console or system that you were designing from or designing for. And game engines, they basically figured out, they're like, well, we could just take all the physics and input and render, like tools that we used to, individual tools that we used to build this, and just put it all into one software system library basically, and then reuse that for other games, and then just do different art assets or different different art. They basically separated what would then become known as the assets from the engine, and the engine they would reuse to make other games that seem and feel and play like other games, but use the same tools. They didn't have to do it all from scratch over again for each system basically. So we'll get into the history how they came about more, but let's talk about some examples of engines for because these are things that we have said these words before. So what are some examples?
The biggest one I think that is most might not be the biggest one, but it's really, really big.
I feel like these first two, I was gonna say the first two that you have here are pretty,
and there's a reason why they're more known, and we'll get into that too. But the Unreal Engine is owned by Epic Games. It was developed by Tim Sweeney, the founder of Epic Games, which has been in the news because of the Epic Games Store lately. So that name is the guy who wrote and helped build the Unreal Engine. A lot of things use it across various platforms. So things like Microsoft's proprietary studios, Gears of War, Crackdown 3, and Fable have all used the Unreal Engine, as well as third-party stuff like Mass Effect from BioWare, BioShock, the Batman Arkham series, Kingdom Hearts 3, Dragon Ball Z Kakarot, Final Fantasy VII Remake, and Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order. Those are just some examples. Of course, Unreal is Unreal Tournament was the first kind of game, first-person shooter, way back in the 90s.
That's where it gets its name.
Is named after Unreal Tournament. Mm-hmm. And then, so that's the Unreal Engine. You want to take the next one?
Sure, yeah. The other popular one, you'll often, if you spend any time looking into game engines, the other one that's super popular right now that people are using is called Unity, and it's been used recently for such games as Pillars of Eternity, Untitled Goose Game, Outer Wilds, Kerbal Space Program, Lara Croft Go, Her Story. A lot of these games we've talked about on the podcast very recently, and so actually I'm really intrigued by Outer Wilds. By the way, are you familiar with Outer Wilds? It's like Majora's Mask, but like it's like the entire game is the like default premise of Majora's Mask, where like after 20 minutes of gameplay, the game resets. So you have to like discover tools to help you get further each time. It's crazy. It's got really good reviews, so I definitely want to. It's one that I want. It's on my like soft backlog list of games.
Something you want to pick up. Unity is used in a lot of indie developers. Like it came about during the late Xbox 360 era, PS3 era of console gaming, where it's an engine that's simple enough to use for studios, and it's cheap enough to license that you don't have to, and you can quickly establish a game and like come, and it's variable enough in that you can create different types of graphics and you can do all kinds of sorts of things. I mean, the games that we just listed, Outer Wilds, Untitled Goose Game, and Kerbal Space Program, are three very, very different games in their style and their art and their animation and their purpose, but they're all built on Unity, which shows its diversity inside of what the engine is capable of. But it really came to popularity because of the indie movement, and it's helped push the indie games to where they are now, into the light, into the mainstream of gaming. So that's Unity. The next one is Game Maker, or Game Maker Engine, depending on how you look at it. This one's unique because you don't have to write a single line of code. It's completely like drag and drop visual scripting.
So it's like,
it's for novices, so it'd be somewhere you would want to start if you were an artist, a writer, or a non-programmer. The people with the ideas who've never written a single line of code wouldn't know where to start, but Game Maker's there to help you with that. You can make puzzle platformers, pixel art. Some popular titles that were made in that engine that we know of are Spelunky, Hotline Miami, Super Crate Box, Hyper Light Drifter. So if you played any of those games, those are all indie games as well. Again, indie because you don't have to have a full studio full of developers to write code. You can just go get this thing and do it.
Yeah, it has all the tools out of the box, more or less, that you need to make a very basic. You're not going to make the next, Star Fox game on it, but you can make very basic. And it's 2D engine, right? Like it's only 2D and top down.
It's a high-end 2D and top-down action game engine.
Yeah, whereas both Unreal and Unity you can use to make 3D games. This one
3D stuff.
Cool. The next one, CryEngine. I don't know much about it, but was it named after the original Far Cry series? Is that why you had those listed? Yeah. So Far Cry, the developers of Far Cry created it. It is free to download and use, which makes it kind of unique. So it's something that like you could get and use now. I don't know how necessarily they make money or market it, but we can talk about that. But all four of those that we just talked about, those are third-party engines. Like anybody more or less, in some cases you have to pay for them. Unreal and Unity for sure, but you can, they're third party. They're used to, make tons of, third party games are made with these. The ones we're going to talk about now, they're all proprietary. So they're owned by, X company, Y company, and they are mostly used in-house to make games. So
the distinction is that you and I could today go look up the Unreal Engine and go get that. Whatever it costs, get a license for it, and you and I could start making a game with the Unreal Engine. Also, you and I could write from scratch our own engine, and that's what a proprietary engine is. It's a development studio that's like, we're not going to source something else. We have such a unique idea that there's nothing out there that meets our needs, and we're going to come up with something on our own. And that's what these are. That's what we're going to talk about now.
Yep.
And the first one to kick off, Squaresoft or Square Enix has the Luminous engine. It was shown off as a Final Fantasy tech demo in E3. I think it was 2013. And it was used to make Final Fantasy XIV Realm Reborn and Final Fantasy 15. They both used this Luminous engine, which is gorgeous. But that's an example of a proprietary engine. What else you got?
Another one is Frostbite. We've talked about Frostbite before. That's EA's engine that was developed by DICE. So DICE made it to make Battlefield, and then EA owns both DICE and Battlefield, so they then used it they then, in some cases, held a gun to studios' heads and forced them to use Frostbite. And with it, other games that have made with it, Need for Speed, Madden, FIFA, Mass Effect Andromeda, Dragon Age Inquisition, Mirror's Edge, and Battlefront all used Frostbite, as well as the infamous Anthem, which is a game that, again, Frostbite made the news because of Jason Schreier's article where people within BioWare said this is not a game that should have used Frostbite.
Yeah, this is the reason why I wanted to call this out is because most of these engines are owned by the studio that created them. This is unique in that the publisher, EA, owns the engine and forces other development studios within their umbrella to use another studio, DICE. DICE made Frostbite, right? So DICE is the developer. They're the hands on the keyboard that wrote Frostbite. EA is saying, okay, other company, BioWare, go make Dragon Age Inquisition using this other company, DICE's engine that was made for first-person shooters.
Right,
but
it's a cost-saving measure because you have to pay for Unreal, you have to pay for Unity. Those are development costs. That money ultimately falls at the foot of the publisher to fund. So if the publisher is like, hey, we own this, and we're going to make you use it because we don't want to pay for Unreal or whatever. So, crazy.
And speaking of Jason Schreier, he has a book, and the name escapes me, but it's something to do with pixels and it's awesome. There's this amazing chapter in there. Blood, Sweat, and Pixels. Thank you. Yeah. And Dragon Age Inquisition, there's a whole chapter in there about that and this exact situation with EA, DICE, Frostbite, and BioWare and all of the stuff that is like the precursor to Anthem. So there's that.
Cool.
Anyway,
all right, let's blast through them as quickly as possible.
id Tech from id Software. I was going to say ID Tech from ID Software, but that's bad. You shouldn't say that. Apparently that's bad. So it's id Tech. Started with back in the day with Quake and Doom. It was the Doom engine, kind of evolved into id Tech. So it was used in Quake, Doom 3, and most notably recently with Doom Eternal, Doom 2016, Rage 2, and Rage 1, all used id Tech and its iterations, first-person shooter engine.
Now, correct me if I'm wrong.
With Unreal.
I was going to say, I thought id Tech, like Unreal, was also licensed out and usable by third-party developers, even though it's owned by
the Quake engine back in the day was. Now it seems like it has a much tighter rein on that. Okay. And maybe that has something to do with the Bethesda umbrella, because Bethesda is the publishing company. I haven't done any research on that. That's my speculation. But yes, you're correct.
Yep. Speaking of Bethesda, they also have the Creation Engine, which they've used to make Fallout and Elder Scrolls, which anybody who's played those games can tell they are made with the same engine. It's clearly the same engine. Yeah. Cool. Yep. All right, next.
So now we go into like Sony, Microsoft, and Nintendo. We haven't actually talked about their stuff. So the next engine is actually a Sony owned as a platform holder, sort of as a first party studio. So we go into like weird interactions here. So Guerrilla Games Studios made Killzone, Horizon Zero Dawn, Death Stranding, sort of. Not exactly. They didn't make Death Stranding, but they made Horizon Zero Dawn and Killzone. They developed an engine called the Decima engine. Sony owns Guerrilla Games, as in not owns them, but they are a first-party studio. They make exclusive Sony games and nothing else. And so the Decima engine was loaned out to Kojima Productions. I think that's the name of his company for Death Stranding.
Yep.
But that's the Decima engine, and that's very exclusive to just PlayStation. Yep. And then there's the Naughty Dog game engine, which we know through all the Uncharted and The Last of Us. And then there's a racing engine for Gran Turismo that doesn't really have a name from Polyphenol. I can't say that name. I can never say the name.
Yeah.
But, yeah.
Yep. Microsoft has their Forza Tech, which is from Turn 10 Studios, and that's for their Forza racing games. They also have an in-house developed engine from a company called Osobo in order to make their flight simulator, Microsoft Flight Simulator. So I'm not familiar with either of those, but yeah, those are some of their proprietary engines as well.
And Nintendo.
Last but not least.
Nintendo being Nintendo, there's almost no public information available about any of the engines that they have in-house. But Digital Foundry can spot similarities between entries in games. If you go to their YouTube page, they usually dissect Nintendo releases and they'll make comparisons and draw stuff like, oh, this ARMS interaction looks very similar to this Splatoon thing. So maybe they're the same engine, but they don't know for sure.
Right.
I mean, we know Breath of the Wild set the world on fire with its engine. So
yes, and they're going to be. We know that they're going to be reusing their engine for Breath of the Wild 2. So that's a great kind of segue too, is just to talk about the fact that like the reason why they use engines is because they turn around. Like you can turn around a game a lot faster if you already have half the work, pretty much half the coding done for you in an engine. All you have to do is design the assets and the art, and and then pick and choose what physics and what interactions and what other systems you want based on coding that's already been done for you. So, it's obvious Nintendo uses game engines. Like, there's no way they're building their games from scratch because they have to stay competitive, and so they have to release games, faster and faster. So yeah, it's very clear that they're using engines. Anybody in this market should be using engines to make games. But they are Nintendo, so those are trade secrets that are locked away, and Lord knows how much levels of security. So cool. All right. So those are a bunch of examples of engines. Those are what engines are. Let's talk a little bit about how they work and how they're marketed.
Yeah. So main game engines use low-level graphics technologies. So you'll also hear these little buzzwords out there called like DirectX or OpenGL or XNA. And those are specific to just rendering and graphics. But you can take one of those things. You can say, hey, I'm gonna make a new engine. I'm going to use DirectX for my graphics. And then you have middleware. And that's like your physics or your artificial intelligence. So the Havok is another very popular physics engine. So that's like a sub. That's why it's called middleware, because it's a middleware between your high-level game engine and your low-level hardware and how you're rendering physics in the game. And then like artificial intelligence, etc. But you combine all of those things to create a common reusable framework to develop a video game with. And so you have rendering engines for graphics, you have animation engines, audio engine for sound processing, you have physics engines and artificial intelligence. All of that, when you combine it together, massively reduces development time and cost by removing all of the duplication effort. So once you have your common set of tools at your disposal, you can then send your development teams out to just use these tools to make your game. So when you want to make the next, first-person shooter and you want to animate a reload animation on a gun, and you're like, okay, well, it has X amount of rounds, and then after the rounds are over, I want to reload. And so like you hear all the clicks and you see the graphics and everything else, like most of that heavy lifting is done for you. So you're just putting in all the specifics of what you want.
Right. And if it's helpful, again, if you're having a hard time picturing what this kind of thing is, I guess one of the better comparisons would be to consider it like Microsoft Office, where it's a software suite, basically. And it may not be exactly like this, but this is the best way that I've come to like understand it. It's like, so, you're like, when you have to do word processing, you're like, I'm going to fire up Word. And instead of having to go in and basically like code format everything, like line spacing and fonts and blah, blah, blah. Like, it's all built in there for you. So all you have to do is just use the tools in the graphical user interface, or GUI, as we call it, in the IT world. And all you have to do is then just, click and, oh, cool, it does all the formatting for you, and you can make it pretty, and you can do all these things because other people have done the actual base coding for you. And then, okay, cool, I've made the word processing. Now I have to attach a spreadsheet and then send it through email, Outlook, Excel. You're doing it all. You're basically compiling a presentation or whatever, or compiling information, and you're using a suite of software to do it. That's more or less what a game engine is. It has all these sub functions like graphics and physics and stuff like that. And then you're saying, here's the software suite we have available for you designers to use, build the game in each of your specialized areas, and put it all, and then they put it all together. So that's kind of how like I've come to understand it. It's way more complicated. I think I read on, I think it was Wikipedia that said that game engines are considered some of the most complicated software out there. So if you think a game itself is complicated, the tools that are used to make it are even more complex.
The game engine is like the ones and zeros behind everything you see and hear and do in a video game. Like everything behind the scenes is all the engine doing most of the heavy lifting. So yeah, they're huge. And when you stand up a new IP and you have a brand new engine you're developing from scratch, that's the 5 to 7 year development cycle that you see with big AAA titles.
Right. So, in regards to how they're marketed, as we mentioned before, there is kind of two approaches. When you make a game engine, you either keep it to yourself and say, we are going to continue to make games ourselves with our tools. And that's the proprietary route. Then there's the third party route where you say, hey, we've made an engine and now we have a bunch of tools that are a bunch of shortcuts that have worked really well for us. Maybe other people want to buy this as well. Maybe we could make money off of it. So essentially, game engines have become their own sub-industry of the gaming industry. And so you can then sell it and market it as its own thing. And that's kind of what we've seen with Unreal, Unity, etc. So how then those are marketed, that's changed over the years. It used to be like you licensed it out and said, you can buy the license and then you can download it from us. But we're seeing a kind of shift now more into things like subscription models and whatnot, which is what we're seeing across the industry. I mean, not just the gaming industry, across the software industry. I know Unreal has like a free to download program that they've launched in the last few years where you can actually download the entire software suite for free. But any games you make and sell, you have to send royalty checks basically to Unreal. So they make a cut percentage of every game that you publish and sell as a result of it. So that's kind of cool because it means that aspiring developers who want, people who want to just get Unreal and practice with it can for free. Which is kind of cool thing.
So that's about anything. Yeah, it's very, very accessible.
So that's why you can see things. That's where I first encountered Unreal Engine as a thing of its own when I saw people designing things like, we redesigned Ocarina of Time with Unreal. Like this level of Ocarina of Time, we redesigned with Unreal, and this is what it looks like. This is what it would look like if it were running off the Unreal Engine. And it's like, it's always so beautiful and so incredible. And and that's how I first encountered it. People have the ability to do that because it's free to just play with. And then if they were to then turn around and try to sell that, that's when they would demand royalties and demand to get paid.
Exactly. And Epic Games is behind it. Epic Games also has the Epic Games Store, and they're also the publisher behind Fortnite. So that's why they're so rich. Yeah. Because I just mentioned, like, all of Gears of War is made in Unreal. So is Crackdown 3. There's a million titles. Final Fantasy VII Remake is one of the most notable recent titles that have been made in Unreal, and every single copy that gets sold, royalties get sent back to Epic. And Epic is just this crazy ballooning company. It is by far the most rich gaming entity out there right now.
Yeah, they're
Fortnite alone has put $36 million in like a year. I don't even know the figure. It's insane. I shouldn't even put a number on it, but it's nuts how much money they make.
Yeah, I mean, again, that's all because they designed Unreal and then decided to make it third party and sell it. So they're just they're hand over fist. They're making money right now.
Yep.
It's definitely a way to diversify, your income streams, basically, which is kind of cool. But the more straightforward, that's something that's kind of new. It's a new way they're being marketed. The basic straightforward, if you have a game engine and you want to sell it, license it out. Just like any other thing, you have to have a license code, license key, whatever, and you have to renew that periodically. And that's where they make their money, is they charge for the licenses to use it on an individual machine. So anybody,
the idea of developing an engine in-house and how that's not really marketed. I mean, like you said, Nintendo is the prime example. You have to make that decision as a publisher or even as a development studio as to when you want to develop your own in-house engine, because there is so much legwork to even think of that there is a massive mountain to climb initially before you can even get any art or direction towards a game. You have to create the engine, but it allows both sides of the fence to work together. So if you adopt Unreal Engine, you're bound by the limitations of that engine as a developer. And so your artistic direction or your game design will also yield to those limitations and those things that are around. Exactly. If you make your own engine, you can do whatever you want. But you also have the legwork and the cost associated to reinvent all those things. And
and there's always a balancing act too of like, at what point do developers always have to decide, okay, we've been using this engine for so long, do we continue to use it to make new games? Because as game design changes, as customer taste changes, and even just as the platforms evolve and get better with better technology and all that stuff, like engines become outdated. Like you can see this very clearly with the Bethesda Creation Engine. Like it was great and wonderful for a very long time, but it's starting to show its age. And every game they release and continue to make with the Creation Engine, it's getting more and more clear. Okay, this is starting to get outdated. Are you really going to make Elder Scrolls 6 on the next gen consoles with the Creation Engine, or are you going to update it? And so that's always that continues to be, like you said, because if they update it, that's time taken away from the actual development of the game just to update the engine. So, and again, like it's always a question too. Like you saw this with Anthem. It's like the Frostbite engine was great for making competitive first person shooter in the form of Battlefield, but a kind of quasi open world looter shooter team based third person action game was that the right engine for that? Whereas Unreal has proven to already make that kind of game just fine. Like maybe they should have used Unreal. So again, the engine has a lot to do with the success and failure of a game, but we will get into that. That's spoiling a little bit of our conversation there. So we don't have a ton of time. So if we can do like a 2 to 5 minute version of the brief history of engines and how they've changed over the years, that would be awesome.
I will start, instead of chronologically, just kind of the philosophy behind how they change over the years. Technology and game engines become easier and easier. They advance things at the high level, advance things at the low level, technological advancements and things all drive change. And with that, it's way easier to make and crank out new games with a game engine. And the game engines we have today allow indie developers to crank out games. Engines are becoming more adaptable to various platforms. We have ARM, the ARM architecture. We have the x86 architecture. We have whatever Apple uses. ARM is used on Nintendo Switch, tablets, and phones. The x86 on PC, PlayStation, and Xbox. But we have languages that are even higher level than that. So they're being developed in C++, Java, C#, etc. But these programming languages, you can make a game and you can port it to the Nintendo Switch. You can port it to PC, Xbox, PlayStation, and your iPad. Relatively easy, way easier today than we've ever had. We also have the fact that those platforms exist, that I just listed like 7 different platforms, is also a telling of the times and how engines have had to evolve in order to be compatible with these new platforms. Like, we didn't have cell phones that played games until 2006 is when the first. I don't remember when the first iPod Touch came out. iPod. I don't even know. I can't phone anymore. Can't talk. Anyway, all of these engines kind of started back in the 90s, and it's actually late in the gaming industry because the gaming industry started in the 70s.
Yeah.
It's arguably in the 50s. But as an industry that makes money, it was in the 70s. So 20 years into that industry was the first time we actually even considered an engine or something that can
separating
be reused.
Exactly.
Yeah, like the modular nature of what an engine is. id Software actually did it for Doom, and they called it the Doom engine, and it's the precursor to the modern id Tech engine. And in 1995 is when Tim Sweeney founded Epic Games and developed Unreal and did. He didn't found the company in 95. The Unreal Engine came out in 1995 from Tim Sweeney. And so rather than work from scratch, developers licensed the core portions of the software and designed their own graphics, characters, weapons, levels, their content, assets. So separation of game-specific rules and data from basic concepts like collision detection and game entity meant that teams could grow and specialize. All that kind of happened in the 90s, and we've only evolved from there. So we've had...
Right, and it makes sense because that was the kind of onset of the 3D of 3D games. You know, obviously they were around before that, but like Doom came out, kind of the father of first-person shooters, and with Wolfenstein being the grandfather, and everyone was chasing after that, and so everyone was like, "How do we like?" So Tim Sweeney was like, or not Tim, sorry, id was like, well, why don't we just give people the tools to emulate this, basically, without having to try to figure it all out from scratch and sell that, make money off of that? And that's when they started selling their Doom engine. And then Tim Sweeney had the similar idea. Well, I can just make this and sell it, and people will want to use it in order to try, instead of having to try to figure out how do I make a first-person shooter from scratch, because it was such a revolutionary leap. Whereas before, when you're making a bunch of 2D games, like, it makes sense to me because I'm like, 2D games are much simpler to design from the ground up, and you don't have to do as much, specialization of physics and all that stuff. It's all very rudimentary coding at the end of the day when you're dealing with only 2 dimensions, up, down, left, right, whereas once you start to add 3 dimensions into it, you have all these other physics and things to consider. And so it makes sense that that's when it happened in the game history.
That's good. And then, like, computational advancements happened. So threading became a thing. And, like, hyper-threading was Pentium, Intel's stuff, and CPUs got better and more advanced. So then things like how you render and advanced rendering for, like, related tasks and drawing frames were updated at only 30 to 60 hertz before. And so that's, like, relative to the frame rates and things. But the processor itself was also gimped. Now the processor could go up to like 100 to 360 hertz, which is how many times per second you run an instruction through. And you can do so much more now instead of just rendering a frame. And you have to do audio, you have to do AI, you have to do physics, and all that stuff has to mesh together with your animation and look like it realistic. And so all of those things affect engine development. And now we have all of those extra middleware is coming out now. So middlewares are like micro engines that you plug into your bigger engines. And so we're seeing more modular software engineering practices have evolved, and design philosophies, and how you write code, and design patterns, and more advanced development tactics and like strategies for making code more reusable and modular. And so you can fix very specific things. You don't rewrite code anymore. And it's so much more now, when in the 70s you were using punch cards, and like that's the difference. So video game engines have advanced with the advancement of computing technology.
Yep.
And then, like I said earlier, we have mobile devices and optimization of hardware, CPUs, and power consumption. Like I downloaded a new mobile game yesterday from Turn 10 Studios, Forza Street. And it's, of course, published by Microsoft, but it's free to play. So I jumped on it. The game looks better than the Xbox 360 version of Underground. Or I'm sorry, Need for Speed Most Wanted. And it's on my phone. Like, this isn't a gaming... It doesn't have a fan. It doesn't have a hookup to a TV. It's like, I can cast it. I'm amazed. I was like, this game looks gorgeous. And it's on my phone. How is this working? Like, this is insane. Yeah. So just all of those advancements in technology affect the advancements in game engines, and they're happening in tangent, and like in tandem. Sorry, that's cool. What I'm saying.
No problem. Yeah. So that's kind of, that was good. That was a good, nice, brief discussion about the history. All right, we want to end our time. We want to talk about kind of the why are they important, and whether or not a game engine can make or break the final product. I'll start by saying I think one of the reasons they're important is because if I didn't know about game engine, if I didn't know that the two games were designed off the same engine, I could probably play them both and enjoy them both without ever realizing one of the reasons why I enjoyed it. But knowing, for example, that Death Stranding used the same engine as Horizon Zero Dawn, going into that game with that in mind, my appreciation for it was higher because you can feel the similarities, and to contrast that, I can feel the similarity between Fallout and Elder Scrolls, and that's part of the reason why I don't like the game is I don't like the engine that runs the game. I don't like the stiff feeling of those first person mechanics versus a game like Borderlands that has a much more smooth, much more like it feels more like, I don't know, it just feels better. Viscerally, it feels better to play those games. It feels better to play Doom. It feels better to play heck, even like the Battlefield game, like the way that the first person shooter, like the first person mechanics feel in those games, it's something it's not easy to sit there just from a consumer standpoint. It's not easy to describe, but like, it when you see it, it when you're experiencing it. Maybe not everybody does, but before this podcast, I had no idea about game engines. I mean, if you had described what they were to me, I would have been like, that makes sense, but I didn't understand. You often see like powered by Unreal, I've just been playing through the South Park games, and they're powered by an engine called Snowdrop or whatever. And it's like, like you see it every single time you fire up a game, but you don't I don't at least consciously recognize that. That's
Ubisoft's
concept.
engine, and they use it in The Division, by the way.
Oh, cool. So it's like, I don't know, it's just something that you can feel, maybe not every game, but there are definitely games where you're like, if you know that they're running off the same engine, you can be like, oh yeah, I get it. And it makes sense as to why Anthem, like, why does Anthem have so many load screens? It's because it's using an engine that is meant to be like, drop you into a map, then show your mission stat score stuff at the end of it. And then, and then just put you in an interface to load into the next map and game. That's probably the same map you just played. You know what I mean? Like, it's meant for these small scope, small scale, like things, and then with an interface in between to just get you to the next level, like the next match. So like you can see how that translates into Anthem, when like Anthem should be something more like Destiny, where it's like, yeah, it still has load screens, but then you load into an area and you like free roam, explore, have fun. And Anthem like tries to do that, but with an engine that's clearly not designed for that. It's like, it is definitely like a visceral feeling thing. That people smarter than me could probably break down, but that's kind of my take on it. So it is very important because it really genuinely, from a consumer standpoint, understanding it, like you can definitely see how the final product is affected by whatever you're using.
To bring into my brain an entirely different perspective I never even thought of in any of my research or thinking about this topic. And I never thought about the consumer end of what they care. Like, to me, when you say game engines, I'm like, okay, developers, studios, publishers, like game consumers, you and I'm a developer for not video games, but you and I, the regular Joe Schmo who's out buying video games, like I never thought of what they give a crap about engines,
Uh-huh.
but you just now added that thought to my repertoire of thoughts. And my first realization that engines were a thing. Now, granted, I'm a supercomputer nerd. I dabbled in PC gaming in the early 2000s. And from then I built computers. I was like a computer tech guy. I was in the whole building PCs, troubleshooting and debugging, LAN parties. I was a major PC gamer for many, 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 many years, pretty much all of the 2000s. And my first realization that an engine was the same was the Quake engine, specifically the Quake 3 engine, because I played Star Wars Jedi Knight 2, Jedi Outcast, and it had the same little loading, you double click on the shortcut and a little dialog box would come up and a bunch of commands would run. And I noticed the same thing in Quake 3. And then I also noticed the same thing in games like Soldiers of Fortune and the original Call of Duty. And I was like, this is similar. And then the original Medal of Honor. And then sure enough, they all felt kind of the same, and they all had the same kind of lighting effects and shadows and animations, and the art was different, but everything else was exactly the same. And I realized these are all the same. So, and back then you couldn't just Google everything. I mean, you were on the cusp of that. We were almost there, but sure enough, that's exactly what it was. It was the Quake engine, and I realized that. The second most groundbreaking realization for engines being the same was Ocarina of Time and Majora's Mask. They were identical. There were some graphical improvements for Majora's Mask, but it was identical.
A couple of new physical, physical animations that Link would do flips and stuff. That was one of the first things I noticed differences between Majora's Mask and Ocarina of Time. But like you said, the moment to moment gameplay feels almost identical. In those two games. Sure
enough, the game was turned around in 1 year.
Yep.
So that's
totally
it's crazy for two giant titles to come out in 1 year from each other.
And again, I think what I had in mind when I wrote this question is, why is it important for us to understand it as consumers? Is because it is you drew the comparison between engines and genres in a lot of ways. And I think that from a consumer standpoint, that's an apt comparison, because in a lot of ways, I'm going to be more likely to play a game if I know that it's going to, or at least if I suspect that it's going to feel very similar to other games I played, which is why Horizon Zero Dawn's engine, the Decima engine, was that what it was called? The Decima engine, when they announced that they used that for Death Stranding, that was actually a selling point for me, because I was like, oh, I really loved how that game felt. Horizon Zero Dawn specifically felt to play moment-to-moment gameplay, and so I was like, so I suspect that that's going to get a very similar feeling from Death Stranding, even though that at the end of the day, wildly different games in regards to what you're doing, what what assets are being used, look, feel, everything. Very different games at the end of the day, but they still have the very same root feeling when I push the stick forward and press the buttons. You know what I mean?
Yep.
It definitely makes a difference. And similarly, any game designed on Frostbite now, I'm going to be critical of. And
Frostbite's great for Battlefield. I was a huge Battlefield fan, and the first game that I know that used it was Battlefield 3. So every other game from then on that used Frostbite, I'm like, oh, this game's gorgeous. It has fantastic rendering physics. They called it Levolution, where you could change the level mid game. It's this is awesome. But the moment they come out and say something like Dragon Age Inquisition is going to use Frostbite, you're like, wait a minute. That's a third-person action RPG. That's entirely different from a first-person shooter.
Yeah.
And
has different needs. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And sure enough, that game's development was ridden in controversy, but it ended up coming out, and it was a banger. It was awesome. And it won Game of the Year, actually, that year that it came out. And I don't remember what year it was. It was 2014, I think. But as a consumer, the use of a game engine can dictate some of the review cycles or the preview cycles or the discussion around the game as it's being developed. Final Fantasy VII Remake started as being developed by CyberConnect 2. It was outsourced, and the moment that it was shut down and brought in-house was a massive red flag and warning sign, because nobody knew what was going on. CyberConnect 2 made a bunch of games for Bandai Namco on an engine that they had. I don't know what engine that was, but now it's going to be inside of a Square Enix development studio. What are they going to use the Luminos engine? Are they going to rewrite the entire game from scratch? How many years is this going to be? What is the development trouble behind this game? And so you can already start to put the pieces together that the Final Fantasy VII Remake is not going to be good. Well, they surprised us all and it ended up being amazing, but they used Unreal Engine. So there you go. All of that discussion I knew as an enthusiast gamer. we're not the regular mass. I mean, we are very niche in our understanding of engines and what that means when a new game is announced and they're saying it's going to use the Frostbite engine or it's going to use the Snowdrop engine or something. Like, we can automatically put some prejudice out there for what this game is going to be and make our own judgment and assumptions. So yeah, your last question is like, can it make or break a final product? It can at least affect the preview cycles of its news beats and its discussion in magazines, on websites, in articles, in podcasts like ours. Those things can definitely affect, like, engine choice can affect that end of it too, from a consumer perspective, which I didn't even have prior to this discussion. So thank you.
Yeah, I mean, and then obviously from a development perspective, then yes, the tools that you use to make the game, at the end of the day, there are still things like grit, determination, enterprising, talented individuals those are the people who end up making and breaking the final product. Yep. But if you put a talented developer and you put in their hands a tool that they are not used to or a tool that they are not talented with, you give a paintbrush, a painter, chisel and a hammer, they're not going to know what to do. They're not going to necessarily make great art with it. They may be able to scrape something by, but they're not going to make a masterpiece with it. So again, everybody has their tool preferences. So some really talented people can make do with a not optimal tool, but still, I think the tools do matter. So again, I wouldn't necessarily say it. It's not in a bubble, in a isolated system. Then when you have factor in the fact that, like, there's still people that have talent and their grit and determination can also influence the final product, then I wouldn't say the engine itself can make or break. But I think we have seen plenty of examples of, and we have talked about plenty of examples of games that were made with engines that they shouldn't have been, or engines that are definitely in for an updating, definitely overdue for an update. So I do think that they're still an important piece to talk about at the end of the day. But
absolutely,
again, I do think, part of our podcast serves to, we want to educate. And so we want, we're hoping that you learn something and that you might start putting the pieces together when you think about games, when you see game news, and consider the engine as something that is worth consideration. So, and maybe you already do that, which is great. Awesome. We want to hear more thoughts about that. But if this is new to you, and if this is something that, again, I have just only recently learned about it in the last couple of years, it's something that has come across my bow while researching and discussing on this podcast. So it's a very new discussion for me as well. But we do want to hear your thoughts. And that's where we'll wrap up and end. And we want to hear what you have to say about this. I'm sorry, Termite, did you have any final conclusions that you want to draw, or?
Yeah, engines, like, even in the mainstream, like, you look at the most top-selling games out there, it's Call of Duty and Grand Theft Auto. Grand Theft Auto 3, Vice City, and San Andreas all use the same engine, Renderware. And Grand Theft Auto 4, Grand Theft Auto 5, Red Dead Redemption 1, and Red Dead Redemption 2 all used Rage, Rockstar, something game engine, advanced game engine. And in Call of Duty, you have Treyarch developing games for it. You had Sledgehammer developing Call of Duty games. So there was like three, I can't remember the third one now, but there's three different development studios, each making Call of Duty. Every single year there's a new one because they're cycling through a 3-year development cycle. And you'll notice they all feel a little different. And that's because they're all using their own engines, and they're all using tweaking the engine. I don't know which engine they use. I haven't looked it up. But even in the mainstream, like, there's reasons why these things, Ubisoft is using the same engine for all these Assassin's Creed games that come out all the time. And it's because they work, they feel good, and people buy them, and they're comfortable with them. And so even if you aren't super well versed in engines, you do feel it. You just haven't been made aware of it yet.
Exactly.
That's my last thought. Yep.
Awesome. All right. Well, we do want to hear your thoughts. We want to hear what your feedback is on this topic, whether you're super familiar with engines or whether you're just learning about them. We want to know what you think about them, and what do you think that this doesn't matter at all, and that you're just going to buy games because you like them or whatever.
Yep.
Or if you may be more cognizant in the future of considering the engine as a potential, like, this is something I want to know about, because, for as much as they will, Nintendo's not going to ever tell you about their engines, but, you can speculate and have discussions about it. So we want to hear that feedback. So, Termite, where can they engage with us if they want to talk about game engines with us?
The easiest, most interactive way for you to interact with us is through our Discord server that we have stood up. You can find a link to that Discord server in all of our show notes of every single episode that gets published. With that, we have 80bitpodsmash.com. That's where all of our shows get published to all of our major podcast services, iTunes, iHeartRadio, Spotify, Stitcher. They're all there. There's an RSS feed link there, too, if you want to put our podcast into your third-party app. That's our landing website. Then we have our social media outlets. We have Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and we have our own subreddit. You can post on our subreddit. You can create your own thread, interact with our community there. You can all of our social media. You can tag us. You can comment us at 80bitpodsmash, 80bit podsmash, all lowercase, no funny business. And then weekly, if you want to interact with us live at twitch.tv/80bitpodsmash. We stream every Wednesday evening from 8 to 9. We usually just play something we're feeling, something we're digging. We don't really have a set schedule for what we're streaming, just that we will be live every Wednesday from 8 to 9 playing something. And we again have the vision of educating folks, so we want to talk about who made the game, the developers, the pedigree, etc. So we will always be ready to talk, answer questions. We would love to have your feedback. We would love to take questions, comments, thoughts, concerns, ideas from you guys. We will read them on the show. We'll talk about them. It would be fantastic.
Awesome. Great. So next week, the week of June 1st. Oh, man, we're already in June.
Yep.
We will be talking about localization, so another process in game development, but a little bit different, not quite so obvious, but it is the process of translating games to different areas. I mean, literally translating the words and dialogue of games into different regions of the country that speak different languages. So
it's not just as simple as translating. It's also cultural references and nuances that need to be adjusted.
Exactly.
Well.
So we'll be discussing that, but it's another kind of development. It's development heavy, but from a different perspective. So should be interesting. So you have that to look forward to next week. And really quickly, one last thing. We forgot to mention, we reached 10,000 downloads.
We
haven't talked about that yet. So total downloads. It is
10,000 hits.
Yes. So it is across all of our 140 some episodes. But that was a cool milestone for us to see. So thank you all for listening and contributing to that. And we hope you enjoy the show. And we hope you enjoy this episode. And hope you enjoy next week's episode on localization. We'll see you then.
We will see you next week.